Hey y'all, so we're back reading Black Marxism. I hope all is well. We are on part 3, Black Radicalism, Marxist Theory, chapter 9, the Historiography, and the Black Radical Tradition, which is still Du Bois's chapter, but now we're on Blacks and Communism. So I'm going to read the last section of that part to be like, okay, what are we talking about? And then we'll get into the section. Oh, wait, did I say I hope all is well? Well, if I didn't, I hope all is well. The First War of the World in the 20th century is a watershed for those events that directly influenced the special character of the American Communist movement and the party's policies towards blacks. It was during the war, or because of the war, or in the aftermath of the war that these events occurred. First, there was the transformation of international socialism. The Comintern succeeded the Second International as the leading force of the socialist movement. That's when we read Bolshevism and American Communism, which I think is part 49. Second, in the United States, a black immigration from the South resulted in the formation of northern urban black communities and subsequently a new form of racial consciousness, black nationalism, which is part 50. Third, being almost simultaneously with the formation of the American Party, there was an intercession of the Comintern, Lenin and then Stalin on the Negro question. These were the critical events and that's the part we're going to read right now, Blacks and Communism. These were the critical events. It is necessary now to look at them in more detail. Okay, Blacks and Communism. In its beginnings, the American Communist movement required no special policy in regards to blacks. Having been constituted from the rebellious left wing of the socialist movement did not signify for these communists a departure from the presumption that blacks were simply a segment of the unskilled working classes. Moreover, with the American socialist movement drawn predominantly from immigrant, ethnic, and national minorities, the notion of class solidarity was of substantial importance to the movement, theoretically and practically. And think about that right now. It's really interesting how you can see, I liked patterns. So you can see the patterns in history reflecting now in a modern stage. And then when you look at history, you can be like, oh, it makes sense why people are acting the way that they act. They've been acting like this. It's the way that it's not necessarily, it's the way that the Western world is set up. Okay, for example, like on TikTok, I don't know if this is like a real, social media is also kind of a reflection of what's going, it's like a little microcosm of what's going on in the real world, I guess, even though social media is a part of this real world, modern real world. But you see how, like, there will be white people talking about just class solidarity and disregarding the importance of disregarding the ways in which white supremacy and patriarchy play into this racial capitalistic society. And they'll be like, oh, it's dividing us. Blah, blah. Okay, wait, let me just keep reading I'm sorry. My tangents. I'm not sorry. Actually, I like my tangents, but it's too early in the chapter to start going off on tangents. Anyways. It provided a category of political activity through which the diverse social elements of the revolutionary movement, ethnics and nationalities, workers and intellectuals could be reconciled, transcending their several particular interests. The absence of such class consciousness among blacks and, in its stead, the presence of a racial consciousness was seen by early American communists as both an ideological backwardness and a potential threat to the integrity of the socialist movement itself. Think about that with, right now, how, say a black person were to bring up, this is more on social media that I'm saying this, but I'm sure it is reflected in real life. Say a black person brings up race. Oh, you're dividing us. No, girl. You was being racist. And we're trying to be, we're trying to be in unity, but we can't be in unity if you're going to be racist. Okay. To the degree that the early movement became aware of black nationalism, that too would be unacceptable. Black nationalism was intolerable to a movement so constantly close to the foundering on national and ethnic divisions. This concern was made manifest by the frequency, because with the divisions are meant to divide us, right? But within the socialist movement, they're trying to remove, correct me if I'm wrong. Nope, you know what? That will be in the discussion after I process my notes, and go through that, because that I have a note in my head. I mean, yeah, if you think about whiteness, it tells you to remove your cultural and historical identity, so your nationality, like, you're not Italian, you're white. You're not Irish, you're white. And within this Western society, in favor of white supremacy, and then that white supremacy is reflected within the socialist movement. Right? We're going to put a pin in that and come back to that later. This concern was made manifest by the frequency to which black back to Africa ideologies were described as Zionist and compared to back to Palestine or Palestine movements among the Jewish, a substantial and influential minority in the early socialist movement. The party consistently opposed black nationalism until its own variant, self-determination, emerged in the Soviet Union in 1928. The UNIA, as the strongest organization among blacks within a nationalist ideology, was characterized as a bourgeois reactionary group and made a focus on the attack on black nationalism. American racism did not justify the program of black nationalism. European immigrants... Let me see if we can get more lighting. Yeah. Ooh, oh. Okay. European immigrants with other than Anglo-Saxon origins were also targets of racist abuses and discriminations. Think about, like, dark Italians in, like, Sicily. Yeah. Racism, then, was merely an element of ruling class ideology, and white chauvinism its political position. That means acting in a racist way. So your behaviors and attitudes are racist. Or aligning with, yeah. Thus, the social context of blacks was adapted by ideologues in the socialist movement to the social experience of European immigrant workers. The Communist Party did not actively recruit blacks until 1921. This change in policy seems to be largely the responsibility of Lenin, and even more remarkable when we recall that Lenin's name was barely known to any of the national elements in the American movement 4 years earlier. Nevertheless, it was Lenin who raised the Negro question at the Second Congress of the Communist International in 1920. Dang, I really need some chapstick. And it was Lenin who wrote to the party in America, sometime in 1921, expressing surprise that their reports to Moscow made no mention of party work among Negroes, and urging that they should be recognized as a strategically important element in communist activity. The American Communist Party then began its recruitment of blacks, primarily through radical black intellectuals and nationalist organizers. The nucleus, as we have printed out, was those who made up the majority of the Supreme Council of the African Blood Brotherhood. Still, the historical and theoretical antecedents of the American Communist Party's work among American blacks and its eventual positions on black nationalism were substantially drawn from the experiences of Russian revolutionists. In the same year that Lenin had addressed the Second Congress of the Comintern. Oh my god, guys, I'm gonna have a fan out moment, like a fan moment. My professor, he followed me back on Instagram. Oh, it's the professor for this class. Okay, so I took this class, Black Thought in the Diaspora. We read this book first, Black Marxism. The next book we're gonna read is In the Cause of Freedom, Black Internationalism from Harlem to London, from 1917 to 1939. Then Black Internationalist Feminism, and then Pan-Africanism in the African Diaspora. And I obviously, like, for me, I'm only one person with one, you know what I mean. Hopefully the goal is to get, like, some other people, like my friend that really put me on for this information, to, like, collaborate with me, because he's really smart. And there's so many times he'd be like, Alana, that's wrong. I'd be like, thanks, thank you, I needed that. But he's cool. I took this class, Black Law in the Diaspora, so that's what the books that, the inspiration from that, also like the Kwame Ture Society, things like that. That gave me inspiration to start reading the book online for YouTube and then writing notes. Girl, we're almost done. But and then upload those to Discord, but I'm almost done with that so we can finally get that ball rolling. And yeah, but he followed me back today and I was like, party. Okay. Anyways, where were we at? Oh, in the same year that Lenin had addressed the Second Congress at the Comintern, he had written Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder. To reject compromises on principle, to reject the permissibility of compromises in general, no matter of what kind, is childishness, which it is difficult even to consider seriously. There are different kinds of compromises. Here, Lenin was mounting an attack on what he termed left opportunism, that is, political action and judgment that used the texts of Marx and Engels to criticize and oppose Lenin and the Bolshevik Party's leadership. The setting was 1920. In Russia, the Civil War was still undecided, and in Europe, the revolutionary movement had been temporarily defeated. Lenin was urging a tactical retreat. This document was meant to stem criticism that emerged from other Russian revolutionists who insisted that the revolution must maintain an international arena and scope and could not be secured in one national territory. Through the document and other activities, Lenin hoped to diffuse the left deviationists before they became an unmanageable and disruptive force at the Second Congress and broke the Bolshevik Party's control and direction of the Third International. Despite its logical inconsistencies, historical omissions, and distortions, and its contradictions of Marxist theory. Oh, this is page 218. If you want to read along with me, to page 228. And its contradictions of Marxist theory, his document became one of the most significant works of the first decade of the Third International. Much of this was to be attributed to Lenin's authority in the movement as the world's most powerful communist. But as important was the work's legitimation of accommodation to world capitalism and imperialism. It provided a pragmatic modus vivendi, meaning of living, mode or manner of living for communist parties elsewhere to survive. So it provided a pragmatic way of mode of living for communist parties elsewhere to survive while maintaining the illusion of being revolutionary rather than reformist. Oop. The thread of Lenin's argument and his political declarations could be traced stylistically to his critique of left communists in 1918 when in writing Left-Wing Childishness and the Petty Bourgeois Mentality. Where's my chapstick at? I can feel it on my lips. Lenin had been forced to defend the development of state capitalist bureaucracy and the Brest, I think that's how it's pronounced, it's B-R-E-S-T, treaty with the Ukrainian government. Substantively, the thread could be found in his characterization of the Revolutionary Party as the vanguard of the revolutionary masses. And the quote is, by educating the world's party, by educating the Workers' Party, Marxism educates the vanguard of the proletariat, capable of assuming power and leading the whole people to socialism, of directing and organizing the new system, of being teacher, the guide, the leader of all the working and exploited people, and organizing their social life without the bourgeois and against the bourgeoisie. Without the bourgeoisie and against the bourgeoisie. Doesn't that sound a little bit like what is that called? Paternalism? Oh, you need to do this. Rather than you ask, well, what do you need? What can you know what I mean? Like giving the voice to the people. It's like, oh, this is what y'all need to do so you can be free, actually. And then the people are like, why are you trying to determine what I need? This is just a thought. Let me know if I'm wrong. This is just a thought. a formulating thought in my brain where it's like the hypothesis. It's like, it's not a thesis. It's a hypothesis, right? And you know what, shut up. But you know what I mean? Like paternalism, where you think that, okay, let me get the actual definition. I wrote it down, but one second. I can't believe you followed me back. I actually have been another reason as to why I'm doing this is because I'm rewriting my essay for him, because I hated my essay. I hated it. But let me tell you the beginning of it. Oh, I did not take ADHD medicine today, so I'm sorry. I haven't had it for a while. I was at my baby cousin's paternalism. Babysitting her. I babysat her for free because of her mom's first week of work. So I was like, girl, go ahead. I'll hang out with the child as long as you want me to. Paternalism is the idea that it's justified to interfere with someone's liberty for their own good. Maybe I'm wrong. Actually, I won't read this because this is already like a couple of pages that this is gonna be a little bit of a long chapter. So I'm not gonna read it, but if you would like me to read it, or if you would like me to read it after I edit it, because I'm using this work and my other readings over the year, because I found a lot more books that would like accurately I should have put in Raking the Leaves and then connected that to Miseducation and restructured my essay. But I was so disappointed in my essay, but I was going through too much. I was like, girl, let me just type it out. But anyways, let's keep reading. To Lenin, the party was the possessor of true historical consciousness and was the true instrument of history. The party was Marxist theory in practice. It did what it did because the proletariat had demonstrated that it was insufficiently class conscious. It followed then, for Lenin, that opposition to the tasks defined for itself by the party could only come from two sources: the reactionary bourgeoisie on the right, and the pseudo-Marxist petite bourgeoisie intellectual opportunists on the left. In order to survive, the party, acting as the state, compromised with Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and Turkey, the Quadruple Alliance at Brest-Litovsk, Litovsk. It cannot be accused of compromising in general. The alternative had been constituted war and defeat. One must distinguish, Lenin argued, between obligatory compromises, preservation, and those compromises that transformed one into accomplices in banditry. The Bolshevik Party made only obligatory compromises, except when it made minor and easy remediable errors. With a bit of sophistry, Lenin declared, what applies to individuals also applies with necessary modification to politics and parties. It is not he who makes no mistakes that is intelligent. There are no such men, nor can there be. It is he whose errors are not very grave and who is able to rectify them easily and quickly that is intelligent. Programmatically and tactically, Lenin was laying the grounds for member parties of the Comintern in Europe and elsewhere to assume non-revolutionary positions for the moment. Party members were instructed to join parties, movements, and organizations, and to attempt to influence party towards reformist demands necessarily intolerable to capitalism. Communists should not rest content with teaching the proletariat its ultimate aims, but should lend impetus to every practical move leading the proletariat into the struggle for these ultimate aims. In 1920 and again in 1921, Lenin had indicated disappointment in the destruction and organizational priorities established by the American Communist Party. He suggested further that blacks should play a critical role in the party and in the vanguard of the workers' movement, since blacks occupied the most oppressive sector of the American society and were clearly to be expected to be the most angry element in the United States. Look at my baby. She's growing so well. I'm so proud. I'm a proud mother. I'm a mother. No drama. All of this was somewhat characteristic of Lenin as he rationalized the basic opportunism that had dominated the history of the Bolshevik movement. However, Lenin had found no basis of support for his declarations within the American delegation to the Second Congress. Indeed, in the person of the Harvard-trained revolutionary writer John Reed, the American delegation, preoccupied with the image of the UNIA, repudiated, refused to accept or be associated with Lenin's position. Reed defined the American Negro problem as that of a strong racial and social movement and of a proletarian labor movement advancing very fast in class consciousness. He alluded to the Garvey movement in terms that ruled out all Negro nationalism and separatism. The Negroes have no demands for national independence. All movements aiming at a separate national existence for Negroes fail, as did the Back to Africa movement of a few years ago. They consider themselves, first of all, Americans at home in the United States. This makes it very much simpler for the communists. For the time being, the Comintern was satisfied by a vague plan to invite black revolutionists to a future Congress. Two such figures attended the Fourth Congress of the Communist International in 1922. Otto Heeswood as an official delegate and Claude McKay as an unofficial and non-communist observer. McKay and Heeswood, the mulatto delegate, as McKay would refer to him in his autobiography, A Long Way from Home, tended to complement each other in both official and informal discussions of the Negro question. When the American Negro delegate was invited to attend meetings and my mulatto colleague went, the people asked, but where is the Chorny, C-H-O-R-N-Y, in parentheses, the black? The mulatto delegate said, say, fellow, you're all right for propaganda. It's a pity you'll never make a disciplined party member. Ooh, catch that tea. And with the aid of the Japanese revolutionary Sen Katayama, who had spent some time in the United States working as a cook and other things on the west and east coasts. I don't know, babe. We're just gonna vibe. Had been a founder of the unified and Bolshevized American Party and now sat at the Commission for National and Colonial Questions. McKay and Heeswood successfully presented to the Comintern secessions a more realistic basis for discussion. And it was at the Fourth Congress that the Comintern made its first formal declaration of policy toward American blacks. Early the following year, Rose Pastor Stokes, the radical wife of J.C. Phelps Stokes and one of the NAACP's millionaire sponsors, returned to the United States and reported to her fellow party members. One of the most significant developments of the Fourth Congress of the Communist International was the creation of a Negro Commission and the adoption of the Commission's thesis on the Negro question, which concludes that the declaration that the Fourth Congress recognizes the necessity of supporting every form of Negro movement which tends to undermine capitalism and imperialism or to impede their further progress. Pledges the Communist International to fight for race equality of the Negro with the white people, for equal wages and political social rights, and to exert every effort to admit Negroes into trade unions, and to take immediate steps to hold General Negro Conference or Congress in Moscow. to hold a General Negro Conference or Congress in Moscow. Excuse me. Let me take a sip of water. Oh, yeah. Oh, we don't have that many pages. She's a little thick. Oh. When I'm done doing the notes, that's probably when I'm going to start doing the discussions to BH so that I can upload the notes with the discussion. That's what I was just thinking in my head. It's a little brainstorm. I know, it's taking me a long time, but guys, chill out. I'm a slow processor. Also, I found out, I don't know if I told you this, I found out that I was accidentally canceling out my ADHD meds for like months. I thought, you know, sometimes we just go with the flow. Wait, is that better for lighting purposes or no? What do you think? Let me get closer to the camera. How about that? I look like I got a 5 o'clock shadow. It might help with my pronunciation to lay on my diaphragm. 2 American Negroes were guests at the Congress, one a poet and the other a speaker and organizer, both young and energetic, devoted to the cause of Negro liberation and responsive to the ideals of the revolutionary proletariat. They charmed the delegates with their fine personalities. According to Mrs. Stokes, the Negro Commission itself was international in its membership, made up of delegates from the United States, Belgium, France, England, Java is Java or Java, British, South Africa, Japan, Holland, and Russia. The perspective of the Commission was thus international, reflecting the internationalism of Marxist organization the theory of capitalism, and its membership. As the chairman of the Commission, Comrade Sasha Stokes had announced, the world Negro movement must be organized. In America, as the center of Negro culture and the crystallization of Negro protest. In Africa, the reservoir of human labor for the further development of capitalism is like the white person. Yeah. What did I say? In Central America, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Colombia, Nicaragua, and other independent republics where American imperialism dominates. In Puerto Rico, Haiti, Santo Domingo, and other islands washed by the waters of the Caribbean, in South Africa, and the Congo, in East Africa. The work among blacks in America, then, was to be one sector in a world movement against colonialism and imperialism as the contemporary stages of world capitalism. The Communist International was to be the vehicle through which the enslaved white workers of Europe and America and the revolutionary workers and peasants of the whole world would converge on the common enemy. It is the task of the Communist International to point out to the Negro people that they are not the only people suffering from the oppression of capitalism and imperialism, that the workers and peasants of Europe and Asia and of the Americas are also the victims of imperialism, that the struggle against imperialism is not the struggle of any one people but all the peoples of the world, that in China, in India, in Persia, Turkey, in Egypt, and Morocco, the oppressed colored colonial peoples are rising against the same evils that the Negroes are rising against, racial oppression and discrimination, and intensified industrial exploitation, that these peoples are striving for the same ends that the Negroes are striving for, political, industrial, and social liberation and equality. Notwithstanding its contradictions and ideological formulations, this thesis on the Negro question was quite a remarkable document. Certainly, its new world-centric view limited it. For example, the proposition that the center of Negro culture and protest was in America. Certainly, The presumption that the proletarianized black people in America was the most advanced sector of the black world was more a vulgarization of Marx than a product of analysis. But just as certain, this statement was a more sophisticated presentation of the world system that had been developed in the early internationalism of the UNIA. Excuse me. The Commission had successfully urged the Fourth Congress to recognize the relationship between the Negro question and the colonial question. The intention behind the Negro Commission of the Fourth Congress was to substitute system and class consciousness for race consciousness among American blacks. Yet, one enduring lesson from the UNIA was that blacks were capable of organizing on an international scale. The Negro Commission suggested that the UNIA was only a particular form of race consciousness and that it was possible for race consciousness to be transformed into a progressive force. A world historical race consciousness recognizing the exploitation of blacks as blacks, but as a part of and related to the exploitation of other workers could develop from earlier form. That reminds me of this process called negrescence in the formation of of your black racial identity. The highest step is seeing things as like using your blackness informs your fight for social justice. And so you can see that pattern. Yeah. The historical problem posed before the Comintern and its member parties, and especially for American communism, was whether the communist movement had the capabilities to perform this transformation. Starting with the efforts of Heeswood, McKay, and Katayama, it had become increasingly clear that the leadership of the Comintern, Radek, Zinoviev, Trotsky, Lenin, and later Stalin, that only a special program could attract large numbers of black workers to the movement. After 1922, the tutelage and training of black cadres in the Soviet Union was taken quite seriously. The most critical of the results was the formulation of the nation within the nation thesis, announced by the Sixth Congress in 1928. Haywood Hall, in parentheses, Harry Haywood, was one of the American blacks brought to the Soviet Union to study at the University of Toilers of the East, Kutuva, in parentheses, Kutva. When he arrived in April 1926, he joined a small colony of black students that included his brother Otto Hall, in parentheses, Joe Jones, O.J. and Jane Golden, Harold Williams, in parentheses, Dessalines, Roy Mahoney, in parentheses, Jim Farmer, Maud White, who arrived in December 1927, and Banco, a Gold Coast inhabitant. Of the seven black students of KUTVA and the blacks who arrived in the Soviet Union as delegates of the Sixth Congress in 1928, Haywood alone advocated the position of self-determination for American blacks. Haywood's own conversion had come in the winter of 1928 when, in preparation for the Congress, he had responded to a dismissive report of the UNIA authored by his brother Otto. In the discussion, I pointed out that Otto's position was not merely a rejection of Garveyism, but also a total denial of nationalism as a legitimate trend for the black freedom movement. I felt that it amounted to throwing out the baby with the bathwater. With my insight sharpened by previous discussions, I argued further that the nationalism reflected in the Garvey movement was not a foreign transplant, nor did it spring full-blown from the brow of Jove. On the contrary, it was an indigenous product arising from the soil of black super-exploitation and oppression in the United States. It expressed the yearnings of millions of blacks for a nation of their own. Booyah! As I pursued this logic, a totally new thought occurred to me, and for me it was a clincher. The Garvey movement is dead, I reasoned, but not black nationalism. Nationalism, which Garvey diverted under the slogan of Back to Africa, was an authentic trend, likely to flare up again in periods of crisis and stress. Such a movement might again fall under the leadership of utopian visionaries who would seek to divert it from the struggle against the main enemy, U.S. imperialism, and onto a reactionary separatist path. The only way such a diversion of the struggle could be forestalled was by presenting a revolutionary alternative to blacks. I was the first American communist, with perhaps the exception of Briggs, to support the thesis that U.S. blacks constituted an oppressed nation. Snaps to, what's his name again? Otto Hall. Eat it up. And Nasanov, in parentheses, Bob Katz, a Russian representative of the Young Communist League, having spent some time in the United States, was already convinced that American blacks constituted a national question. Katayama was as well, and suggested to Haywood that Lenin had supported the idea. They did, and similarly minded Soviet communists, but they and similarly minded Soviet communists had found difficulty in locating any American blacks to support their position. Nasanov heard Haywood's arguments and promptly requested his collaboration. From the moment Haywood voiced his commitment to black nationalism, the momentum was established for the self-determination line that would become the Comintern's official policy after the Congress. The resolutions and discussion papers drafted by Haywood and Nasanov eventually culminated in the language of the American Negro question, included in the Congress report. Theses on the Revolutionary Movement in the Colonies and Semi-Colonies, December 12, 1928. In those regions of the South in which compact Negro masses are living, it is essential to put forward the slogan of the right of self-determination for Negroes. A radical transformation of the agrarian structure to the southern states is one of the basic tasks of the revolution. Negro communists must explain to non-Negro workers and peasants that only their close union with the white proletariat and joint struggle with them against the American bourgeoisie can lead to their liberation from barbarous exploitation, and that only the victorious proletarian revolution will completely and permanently solve the agrarian and national questions of the southern United States and in the interests of the overwhelming majority of the Negro population of the country. Black self-determination was presented to the American Communist Party as a fait accompli. For years, the true origin of the line would be a mystery to members of the American Communist movement, as well as its historians. It's a lot of words, y'all. Its meaning, however, was clear. As Joseph Ponge, in parentheses John Pepper, characterized it, or as Haywood argues, caricatured it, in the line's first American exposure, the logic of self-determination would conclude in a Negro Soviet Republic. As a strategy, black self-determination addressed itself to several concerns within the Comintern and the American movement. First of all, by the procedure through which it was established, it underlined the leadership of the Comintern over its national parties. Moreover, legitimated by the existence of other national liberation movements as well as the earlier history of American blacks, it also relieved somewhat the disappointments of girl, let me sit up. Of some maybe coffee will help, because what the heck? Hello? Where was I at? It also relieved somewhat the disappointments of some Third Internationalists caused by the failure of an immediate world revolution to develop. National liberation struggles were, by their nature, protracted ones. As a political model, As a political model, it was also useful as a means of expression for those nationalisms and chauvinisms of longer duration in the American Communist Party. Many ideologues in the American movement identified their own nationalist sensibilities with black nationalism. Finally, it was believed it was the most effective means of approaching one of the oldest American peoples, the Negro, first through its radical nationalist intelligentsia and then its masses. Not only should self-determination attract blacks, it was argued, but it could also be the litmus for determining the degree of progressiveness among non-black party militants while weakening the ruling class by jarring the Bourbon pseudo-aristocracy from its industrial and finance capitalist sponsors. Sorry. Okay. Still, the theoretical basis for the party's identification of blacks as a nation was quite unorthodox in terms of Marxist theory. Marx and Engels had both distinguished between nations and nationalities, recognizing in the former nations the capacity for independent economic existence, in the latter nationalities an incapacity. Engels had expressed himself quite clearly. There is no country in Europe where there are no different nationalities under the same government. Here, then, we perceive the difference between the principles of nationalities and the old democratic and working class tenet as to the right of the great European nation to separate and independent existence. Maybe I'm tired. I don't know. The principles of nationalities leaves entirely untouched the great question of the right of national existence for the historic peoples of Europe. Nay, if it touches it is merely to disturb it. The principles of nationalities raise two sorts of questions. Bear with me, y'all. We're almost done. First of all, questions of boundary between these great historic peoples, and secondly, questions as to the right to independent national existence of those numerous small relics of people which, after having figured for a longer or shorter period on the stage of history, were finally absorbed as integral portions into one or the other of the more powerful nations whose greater vitality enabled them to overcome greater obstacles. The logical extension from Marx or Engels would have been to identify the blacks of America as a national minority or as a nationality, but not as a nation. For Marx and Engels, the nation was a quite particular historical phenomenon. Since the end of the Middle Ages, history has been moving towards a Europe made of large national states. Only such national states constitutes the normal political framework for the dominant European bourgeois class, and in addition, they are the indispensable prerequisite, without which the rules of proletariat cannot exist. Engels' historicism branded the nation as an instrument of the bourgeoisie. Its emergence was concomitant to the development of a bourgeois society, a capitalist society. And once nation and then the transnational became realized, it was possible for an international revolutionary movement to command the society that had produced it. For Marx, both language and culture appeared to be secondary phenomenon, the first to be associated with nationality, the second with the dominant class. Unfortunately, throughout the 19th century and into the next, much of the theoretical grammar brought by Marx, Engels, Lenin, and other Marxists to the analysis of American phenomenon and processes was similarly naive. It was naive because of its ahistoriosity and its tendency towards the use of aggregative concepts to the point of redundancy. Girl, that word was hard to read when I first read this book, so I wrote it down. Redundancy. Yup. Unfortunately, its naivety was contradictory. At the historical point of massive immigration, the application of race and class, the grammar's two most fundamental categories, presumed the existence among the majority of American workers of a white working class. Thus, the eventual appearance of a black nation suggested an opposite historical momentum. Lenin proved to be the period. Take a breath. Almost done, y'all. Lenin proved to be the theoretical and ideological midwife, but it was Stalin, it came to be believed in the American Communist Party by its historians, who had provided the theoretical basis for the party's positions that blacks were a nation within a nation. Excuse me. If there was a genius in this scheme, Theodore Draper would declare, it was undoubtedly Stalin. However, the contrast between Stalin and Engels and Marx was dramatic. In what was to be one of the most frequently cited justifications for the Comintern's Negro program, Stalin had entirely forsaken analytical sophistication. A nation is a historically established, stable community of people, coming into existence on the basis of a community of language, territory, economic life, and psychological constitution, which manifest themselves in a community of culture. This extraordinary passage is perhaps characteristic of Stalin's theoretical contributions to Marxist thought and to world knowledge. First, it too is ahistoric, since no contemporary nation had emerged in this way. Second, it is abstract and vague, utilizing such phrase as psychological constitution. Third, it is tautological. Community manifests itself as community. And finally, it is not Marxian, tending as it does towards an evolutionary paradigm as opposed to that of historical materialism. Okay. No. Its one apposite feature was that it was in keeping with the ideological and programmatic opportunism that characterized Stalin's immediate predecessor. The policy implications of this passage fit quite well into the rationalizations found in left-wing communism. That is, perhaps, another sort of proof that the policy was a gloss on the history of black movements and not the independent product of the Soviet Union's political elite. Like formulations on other national liberation struggles, one discovers in Comintern declarations, it was political opportunism searching for theoretical justifications. It thus represented the critical importance to the Soviet Party of forming alliances with movements that were emerging from theoretical pre-capitalist societies. Given historical necessity, Marxist-Leninism compromised itself theoretically with nationalism, and as such institutionalized the force that had brought the Second International to its submission. It might be said that the most simple-minded reading of this dialectic, that the Third International was a synthesis of the thesis, in parentheses, socialism, and the antithesis, in parentheses, national chauvinism of the second. As the official policy of the American Communist Party, self-determination, the Black Belt thesis would survive Stalin, but only barely. And even while Stalin was a dominant figure in the world communist movement, it would have its ups and downs, responding to the national and international dynamics of the revolutionary movement. The policy of Negro self-determination has lived twice and died twice. After overthrowing Lovestone's revisionism, Browder made self-determination one of the cardinal articles of faith in his leadership. In November 1943, long after it had ceased to show any signs of life, he delivered a funeral oration over the corpse of self-determination. He explained that the Negro people had already exercised the historical right of self-determination by rejecting it. After overthrowing Browder's revisionism, Foster made self-determination one of the cardinal cardinal articles of faith of his leadership. In 1946, self-determination was reincarnated in a slightly watered-down version. was a programmatic demand and not an immediate slogan of action. In 1958, the communist leadership again buried the corpse of the right of self-determination. It decided that the American Negro people were no longer a stable community, that the Negro national question was no longer essentially a peasant question, and the Negroes did not possess any distinctively common psychological makeup. And the main currents of Negro thought and leadership, historically and universally at the time, flowed towards equality with other Americans. That the American Negro people did not constitute a nation, and therefore the right of self-determination did not apply to them. Brody. Okay. Lenin had compelled the American Communist Party to take the Black American as a critical element in its policy and organization. Stalin himself, a member of a Russian national minority, had been the authority through which the Comintern and the American Communist Party had come to recognize blacks as an oppressed nation. And for a while, the policies directly influenced by these two Bolsheviks had been successful. Thousands of blacks came into the CPUSA during the 1930s in response to the party's attention and expressed intentions. However, in the background were the UNIA and the Brotherhood. They had established the political and ideological preconditions for the party's policies and its successes. It was the UNIA that had embodied the black radical tradition and primed the black masses with a sense of nationhood. It was the UNIA and the ABB through which many of the early black activists of the party had passed. And it was the UNIA and the Brotherhood that had demonstrated the capacities of blacks to organize politically and respond ideologically. It remains a telling point on the nature of the early American communist movement that the significance of these examples had to depend upon Soviet-directed policy to be revealed. In the light of this account of Russian and Comintern intervention into the affairs of the American Communist Party, it would appear to be a historical irony that it was through Du Bois's work that the first reassessment of Marxian revolutionary theory was attempted. It was Du Bois who introduced into American Marxism a critical interpretation of the nature and significance of revolution, based in large measure on the developments of the Russian Revolution and the American Reconstruction period. Next is Du Bois and radical theory. Anyways, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. I hope that you have a wonderful holiday. Give out love where it's needed. And yeah, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it.